Unreadable.
Any thoughts on what you might want on your pizza?
Cheese.
I know in some parts of the country that's optional.
Cheese. It is.
Yeah.
On the sauce.
Yeah. So.
No, I just want to take stuff in your eyes. Cheese, pepper, and onion. I'm not having it.
What?
I'm not having it. Just see what they're Next one. Mozzarella cheese.
That way only you want to try banana peppers?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if they're open. So not open. Let's do something different. Good. What else do we have in town? Not much, right? Subway.
I mean, Speedway does make pizza.
Let's
It's kind of frightening.
I'm just saying, if they do.
Okay. Well, we'll see. So, okay, so lecture 21, I guess it's just gonna be you two. Well, that's disappointing on a number of levels. Not that you're in the air, that nobody else feels that I have anything to give, so. Okay, so lecture 21. So I've got a recording. I guess we're gonna need that for everybody. So there's gonna be a discussion today with, Brendan Farms about how do you deal with the transition between one generation to the next, and how do you deal with a farm that needs to be modernized, and how do you go through it step by step? They're in the pains of transitioning from one to another. They can talk about the frustrations of that, but they're doing what they can to modernize. And deciding which thing goes first, where do you spend your money, where do you wait? And then next week we'll have Brittany Noto coming in. She's supposed to teach us how to work on pulsation systems. And we'll probably be going past 3 o'clock for most of the rest of the semester. So any questions or concerns? So last time we started our discussion trying to manage mastitis on our farm before we get into specific pathogens and stuff. Let's look at the broader picture. So we talked about 1 and 2 on that list. And we have to go through to 10. So set now our performance goals. What's important to us? What do we think is right? There are some suggestions, but one of the things that one of the judges said at Dairy Challenge was, he goes, there's no such thing as a benchmark. So that you figure out where you are and you decide how you're gonna improve from there. So we can't say everything is really good or really bad. I'm not sure I agree with him, but it comes down to within your farm deciding what is realistic for your clinical cases, what is realistic for your somatic cell and or bacteria. Most everybody, just because of the money on the table, it's financially advantageous to get below 200,000 on the bulk tank. Whether you do that by reducing everything or just taking the correct animals out of the tank. So identifying the problems. So keeping records should help you do this. So looking at treatment records, figuring out which cows have had cases, which cows have never had cases, which cows have had multiple cases. Is there something with that animal that's different? Monitoring your somatic cell, and we'll do that next week. Hopefully those triplates will be here. They're supposed to be here on Friday, but they didn't show up. So maybe they'll show up today. We'll be able to culture. Do you guys want to do cultures on specific cows or specific farms or anything like that or not? If you do, you need to get some samples. So I'll be trying to do those next week. I'll mention it again on Wednesday. We'll probably go through, I think we just had a DHI test, go through and see where our high cows are, see if we can culture them and figure out what they have on the herd. So giving a feel for the prevalence of the problem. And then if we can identify which animals we're dealing with, which microorganisms we're dealing with, is it environmental? Is it contagious? Most well-managed herds, contagious goes away. And we're left with all environmental. One of the knocks on doing on-farm cultures, if I'm using gloves, I'm using single-use towels, pre-dipping, post-dipping, a lot of the contagious tends to go away just by, dry cow treatment, all that stuff. It tends to go away except for the occasional staph cow. And what you're left with is environmental mastitis. And it's like, why am I testing? I know it's gram negative. I can treat it that way. So it just, the testing, once, if people have a good program, doesn't always provide what university professionals think it might. So we'll keep clean cows. This is where we stopped last time. Direct correlation between cows and cleanliness. So you've got stress, which will elevate somatic cells. You've got dirty cows, more bacteria in the udder that's going to increase somatic cell. So you have to sort those things out. Also, dirty cows take longer to milk, so there are those issues. And they're going to increase our bacteria counts along with our somatic cell. So trying to figure out why those cows are getting dirty and what we can do to eliminate that. Do we need to change our bedding protocol? If we go through and we have udder hygiene scores that are 3s and 4s, it's time to make adjustments. It doesn't matter what we're doing does not work in what we're trying to accomplish. So we have to make adjustments. So dirty cows, you're going to have increased chances of an environmental pathogen, E. coli, strep species, coliforms getting into the udder and causing problems. So we've seen this before, a number of different times, standardizing that milking routine. The work done in Wisconsin shows that not everybody's doing the same thing. We saw that, or at least that was one of the things that was pointed out by the judges to our competition team, that people were doing things differently. You think they'd all be doing the same on parallel, but they weren't. So some people were force stripping, some people were not. So where does that come together? There was some issues there, even in we look at our rotary parlors as something we can count on, but people do things that people do. So if we can get the same routine, that's usually 5% more milk. The cows know what to expect. Training the staff. We saw in those videos that most farms don't train the milkers, and it's certainly not an ongoing thing. So if you only get trained once when you first get there, odds are that anybody who's been on that first day of the job, things are coming at you so fast. We have, like when I first came here, they tried to teach me everything about the school in 8 hours. It's like, this is not going to work. I just wrote down names. When I have a question, I know who to go talk to. But learning what I was supposed to do, when I was supposed to do it, that was probably too much there in the beginning. It probably needs to be like 6 months in to give you a feel for what's going on. So that's more than 3/4 and really not getting the training they might. So talking about why you're doing what you're doing and what you're doing. Probably the reason that on the job experience with the supervisor happens is because that's the easiest thing to do. At least you're doing something productive. You're harvesting milk. It might be poorly, but at least you're doing something. I don't have time to do anything else. So. So when we think about it, what are the priorities of the staff? Do the employers do the same thing as the employees? Do as I say, not as I do, usually gets you into trouble. So the purpose for quality on down should be consistent, and employees should see that the family follows through. So update, maintain your milking systems, making sure you change things when you're supposed to, make sure everything's set the way it's supposed to, make sure everything's working the way it's supposed to. So the first thing we usually check, vacuum level, especially during the high group coming through. Is that vacuum still where it's supposed to be? And then we're not getting fluctuations because the lines are getting flooded. So if the lines are flooded, we can't get vacuum over the top of the milk back to the teat end. So making sure we have that consistency. So inflations, there's a schedule for those. We need to replace them when they're worn. All rubber parts, plastic parts, hoses need to be replaced on a regular basis. Now that's goes against a lot of what we think about on farm. Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But there are certain things, especially with inflations, that they don't open and snap back as well as they should. So there's a reason. You could go through and start to inspect things. It's like, okay, when we're done milking, is that inflation all the way open, or is it stretched out in some way? So because you have a fixed hard cup, if it stretches, it's going to bend in some way. You don't have that linear wall going down, so you can inspect. Maybe I can get another couple days out of it, or a couple milkings, stretch things out. There's a safety factor in there if you want to play with that to pull things out. But also we start to see cracks and micro cracks in the equipment that's not necessarily visible. We need to make it a change. We need to make an adjustment. we need to move those through. Making sure our automatic takeoffs are doing what they're supposed to. So getting them checked on a regular basis. Do they come off when they're supposed to? Do they communicate well with the little counter jar underneath there that does what, 0.3 of a pound every time it flushes down? Is that the time it takes for that flush to occur? Sets our takeoff. If we are going very quickly and then we drop down to taking a long time between those flushes, make sure it comes off, making sure that we're doing all the oil changes and other maintenance scheduled by the company, or getting someone in to do it ourselves, do it for us. So again, you'll decide where your money needs to be, where you're gonna make your money. Is that something that on some level you can partition out so you can do something more important and get somebody to come in and do it for you? Or is that one thing that you want to put on your list because you feel you can do it just as well for a whole lot less? So treatment protocols. Do we have treatment protocols in place for when mastitis occurs? So how do we treat mastitis? Do we do anything? Do we do nothing? Do we check her records? Do we take her temp? Do we do some sort of intermammary infusion? Or do we just take her out of the tank for 3 days? What is our system? What's it based on? What are our triggers? We'll show you a number of branching protocol systems that based on what you do for body temp, you're going to go here or here. Or whether or not you've got a swollen cord, go here or here. How do you treat mastitis? What is the plan? What should be done on a particular farm? What type of mastitis do you treat? There are certain ones that respond to treatment, particularly an intermammary infusion, and there are a bunch that just, you're better off putting it on the ground. Less chance of contaminating the tank. It does absolutely nothing for the animal and just costs you there. So environmental, treat the symptoms, but intermammary infusion just doesn't do anything. Particularly, has anybody read the labels associated with the mastitis treatments?
Yeah.
They'll tell you which organisms they work on and which ones don't. There are some that's like, yeah, that's not going to work on those gram negatives. So most of my stuff is gram negative, and this treatment says it doesn't work explicitly, but it doesn't work on gram negative. Why do I use it for that case? So we'll read labels, probably 2 weeks going through to figure out which ones make a difference and which ones don't. So how do I handle things? How do I know the type of mastitis a cow has? Given the organism, given what we're dealing with, we want to act differently. So if we can decide in some way, if we can at least split them gram negative and gram positive, that sets us on a different course of treatment. So how do we dry treat? Do we dry treat? Any more people are getting selective. We know that there's a potential coming down. The government is considering banning use of antibiotics. Possibly, yeah. So, but if you go through, they're worried about antibiotic resistant bacteria. Where do most antibiotic resistant bacteria come from? Hospitals. So it's not the farmers that are causing the problem, but this is an easy thing for them to legislate. So do we treat? Do we not treat? So we may lose that ability moving forward. There are some places, there's one place down the river road that hasn't been dry treating for a long time, because they just basically milk their cows right through the dry period. What we see is the dry period, and that saves them, I think the last time I talked to them about that, 40,000 a year. So, do they get the milk production they should in the next lactation? Probably not, but they also get 60 days more milk through the dry period. So if those animals are only around for 2 lactations, you got a high fill rate, maybe it makes sense. If nothing else, if you've got fat cows, it gives a place for that extra fat to go. If you milk them right through, they're less inclined to get ketosis. So, because the fat has a place to go, instead of dumping it in the liver, you dump it in the mammary gland and it gets milked out. Is that the best use of your fat? Probably not, but it does appear to lessen the problems of ketosis at calving. So keeping records, making sure you mark your animals. How do we make sure that those animals do not get in the tank? That's certainly a fear of mine. That's probably why it hasn't happened yet, but that's one of the reasons we have all those animals out in a separate pen here, as opposed to mixed in with the general population. That's more of a common thing, that the animal can still get bred, the animal can still get the nutrition it's supposed to, but the chances of mixing up here are pretty high. So whatever your answers are to all these questions, that becomes your protocol. You do something about it? Yes, no. If we don't do anything about it, that's your protocol. But you need to go through these and decide how you're going to keep things straight to have good quality milk on the other side of things. So having that state of security plans, biosecurity, if you've got animals coming in and out, if you've got trucks coming in and out, maybe there's an opportunity to be a little bit cleaner. So we've got a lot of cows moving around in this country. A national survey, 18% of all milk cows were purchased from somewhere else. Almost half the herds introduced at least one cow. A bunch of people go to the fair. Who knows what you might pick up there? Who knows what you might pick up at the dairy and take back to your home farm? So 20% of the operations bought lactating cows. So the question is, why did the seller want to give that animal up? So there are farms around. It's like, I'll take a chance. If I get an animal for a fraction of what she's worth at an auction, I'll take a chance to milk her. Sold through as milk cows. May or may not have something, but certainly from us, depending on when we're selling things, if a big slug comes from Morrisville, you can be pretty sure that those animals are okay. We've been told to do something. So most farms have cows coming in, but only 6% of the herd isolated those animals in some way. So put them in a separate pen, go through, test them, check to see if they're showing any incidents. I mean, even just put a CMT on it. So most of the herds don't require any testing coming in. So there's a challenge there. You got to either trust where they're coming from, or you just roll the dice and hope nothing happens. So you would think at least if the cow's on DHI, you're buying it from somewhere. Can I get her records? Look at what her history of somatic cell is. So that may be a problem in the sense that you're questioning someone's integrity or trust. But business is business. One would think you should at least do a CMT. It'd be nice if you could get a milk culture, see if that cow has anything that should be identified. You can know in 24 hours whether anything grows on those plates. You quarantine an animal for 24 hours till you wait for those results. And if there are, maybe there's an opportunity to save yourself from contaminating the rest of the herd. So you're not going to do all that stuff. What can you do? So we're thinking about mastitis. Try to get them before they get it. Although there are certain staph things that can be transmitted when they're very young calves. Has everybody heard of that? If a fly gets mastitic milk, contagious milk, that's staph. If they go and land on the teat ends of calves, those staph organisms can wait till they calve in before they'll do anything. It seems kind of odd, but there's no milk around. Maybe there, but as a general rule, if they're not lactating yet, we have a reduced risk of mastitis. So buying healthy animals coming from a known healthy herd. What is the bulk tank somatic cell? What is the somatic cell for that individual cow? So having a cow less than 200,000 suggests that she's not infected, although that is not a perfect guarantee, especially given the stress of transport, lower the immune system, maybe something flares up. So keep purchased animals healthy. So making sure they're housed separately. Making sure we do CMT. Couple days after the colostrum's out of her system. See if we've got an infection popping up. And then if we've got that infection popping up, we need to culture that animal. Going through. See what organism we're dealing with. And hopefully get things sorted out. Might be a good idea just to keep an eye on things. Doing a test on the bulk tank twice a month during periods when animals are entering the herd. Has anybody dealt with mycoplasma? In a herd, what that can do to a herd? It's ugly. That happens. So if you get your tank tested, make sure you request that. That's an extra cost. But you need to know that before things go crazy. Once they get mycoplasma, the only thing you can do is ship them. So it does not go away, it stays with them. And you get the young calves where they start to fuse growth plates and stuff as they're growing up and their heads start to turn sideways and stuff like that. So, but once you get it, there's no way to get rid of it. So you have my deepest sympathies if that goes in that direction. So taking care of your dry cows, making sure that we keep those animals clean. We know historically, and the reason that we have dry cow treatments is we know when we stop milking those animals, they've got all that pressure there, milk going in and out of the teat end. That's a high time for risk for mastitis. We also know that as they're calving in, that's another high risk time that milk's being formed. It's not being withdrawn all the time. So there's an opportunity there for an infection to occur. If the animal is stressed in any way at calving, we will go through a period of suppressed immune system due to stress. That suppression will allow mastitis to get a foothold. So we know that our dry cows, the udder is no longer being flushed out. Teat canal has become shorter, so the bacteria don't have as far to travel. The immune system can be depressed as the cow approaches calving if she's under stress in some way, shape, or form. So we're gonna provide clean, dry stalls and bedding for our dry cows. Get them out of the slop. We want to calve them in a nice, clean place. If we can isolate the sick cows from the dry cows and the fresh cows, especially if they have something contagious like mastitis, keeping that milk away from our healthy cows will reduce our chances of infection. Balanced rations, make sure we get our vitamin E in there, antioxidants. Cows make their own vitamin C. And then selenium. So getting those shots in there usually during the dry period. So old recommendation. Treat all quarters with improved treatment for dry off. So what do we know about dry off treatments versus during lactation, lactating cow treatments versus dry cow? Much higher doses than dry off. And you've usually got some stuff in there that's gonna help that antibiotics stick around a little bit longer. So we're looking at meat withholds that are significantly higher, milk withholds, which is, I guess, why the dairy tests every cow coming in, making sure she cleared all that from her system. But you're looking at 45 days. So if those cows calve early, you need to check them and make sure that they no antibiotics. Heat sealants. That's probably going to be the way we're going, although there's a lot of, depending on where that milk goes, there's some issues with teat sealants. So people making cheese have a real objection to teat sealants. So getting your vaccinations going for your E. coli, making sure we get those timed appropriately, dosed appropriately, and make sure our animals are healthy when we give them to them. So failure of a vaccine, if we're not ready or we don't have the immune system to respond, that vaccine will fail and fail to elicit the response that it needs to. Fresh cow protocols to screen for contagious mastitis. CMT on day 5, trying to get those cultures in. Anybody who comes back positive. So you guys have CMTs down, right? So, okay. So use of appropriate consultants. So take advantage of expertise for those concentrated in specific areas. So we're trying to bring those resources into this class. So at least you know what names to listen to as time goes by, as they continue to write in the popular press or be mentioned in the popular press. Consultants should make you money. If they're making themselves money and you not nothing, you need to find another one. So seek an opinion of those who see many management styles and facilities. So the ability to take the generalized concepts and focus and tailor to a specific farm operation, a specific farm business is a pretty strong talent. You can find people that like that are willing to work with you, not telling you what to do, but saying, okay, in your given situation, try this, this, and this. So if somebody's got an array of understanding, lots of different ways to do things, how do we custom tailor it to the facilities and management styles? If you don't, the idea of that thing working, that idea of being figured out is less likely. So any questions on that list? Okay, so we'll skip forward. Okay, so we've mentioned it a number of times, but we probably should define it. So what is mastitis? Intermammary infection is one explanation. So we have an inflammation or irritation of the mammary gland. That can be from a number of different reasons. In our lactating dairy cows, it is usually bacteria, but there are other reasons we can run into trouble. So physical trauma in some way that causes swelling or irritation. We might have a chemical irritation. Some of the wrong chemicals get where they're not supposed to. That can cause problems. But with our mastitis in our dairy cows, almost always that inflammation, that irritation is caused by a bacterial infection. But there is the opportunity of those other ones. So risk factors for mastitis, I think we've seen a slide similar to this before. What is going to increase the chances of mastitis occurring? If you have a lot of infectious organisms that cause mastitis, challenging that animal. We have characteristics of the cow. What is her temperament? What is her udder conformation? What is her teat conformation? That may predispose her to mastitis or not. How does her immune system work? What kind of nutrition is she going through? Well, you might put that under environment. So milking machine, is the milking machine set up in such a way that it's not going to promote problems? Milking procedure. We've mentioned the different types that might influence it. We're trying to get a good strong letdown. We're trying to empty that udder out and then get that teat end protected and closed at the end of milking. The environment, how much bacteria is she being exposed to? How much stress is she under? How are everything coming together? So that probably includes nutrition, although you could say characteristics of the cow might include that. But you got lots of different factors coming together and decide, yes, that animal's going to get infected, no, that animal isn't. So we've already said a couple things about mastitis in the milking machine. So bacteria can hold that bacteria in there. So as you put that machine on the next animal, maybe there's an opportunity for that bacteria to infect the next cow that machine comes in contact with. If we don't do a good job cleaning, maybe we have multiple cows infected. So that's why we try to do those last and go through a full clean. We talked about impacts going through. So pressure changes. We let air into the system, that can force air toward the vacuum. If that vacuum is at the teat end, we can cause milk to be transferred from one animal to the next or one teat to the next, even introduced completely into the next udder. So if we have liners that need to be replaced, as a guy taught mastitis prevention at Michigan State goes, he goes, I don't care what the thing says, as soon as they're stretched out, done. So if you only got one milking at it and it's stretched out, it's time to get another one. So hopefully we've got a good guarantee, good manufacturing that we can count on a certain length of time from each of those. So improper liner function is going to damage the teat end if we can't get it closed properly. It's also going to affect milk out if we can't get things opened to get a good milking phase. So this is an illustration of that impact. So you got air coming in on the side of the teacup, that pushes that air through. It's going to take those droplets, and if they hit their target on the other side, they can be introduced into the other teat end. So that air supposedly, we don't know how somebody measured it, but going through here at up to 60 miles an hour. So it's gonna pick up that milk, blow that milk up on that T-end. So if it's inside the T-end, inside the street canal, post dipping is not gonna help you. So it's already beyond the defenses. If it's on the outside, post dipping should help you. So they have now designed claws. They've been through a number of iterations where these two don't line up anymore. So we got a spiral, so it doesn't take to the other side. They eventually tried to do 4 different chambers on the claw. That caused all kinds of cleaning headaches. So trying to come up with a system. I think we've got that fairly standard, although there's a lot of old milking machines running around and still will allow this to happen if there's a liner slip. So making sure we don't have those liner slips, make sure we hang those machines high enough so we don't have air being introduced that way. We can also, as we're putting them on, when the one side, the other's on, the other side is bringing it brought up. If we introduce air in there, if there's enough milk left behind, we can have an impact that way. So clinical mastitis. So we're seeing something that's visible, that's detectable. So we look at flakes, we look at discolored milk, we look at cow looking off, we've got a swollen quarter. All those fall into the area of clinical mastitis. Subclinical means we usually have an elevated somatic cell count, but other than that, everything seems fine. So is that really subclinical? It's there, I can measure it with a somatic cell count, but that's the way they divide it up. Subclinical is not supposed to be seen, but there are ways to get in there and see it anyway. So usually in this case, we're looking at severity between the two. So scores, you guys have had this before in vet, right? So 1 is mild. We're only showing 1 sign, milk, abnormal milk. 2, moderate. We've got the milk and the gland. So abnormal swelling, pain, abnormal milk. And then our 3 is the most severe, where we've got the milk is changed, the gland is swollen or painful, and the cow is showing signs of sickness. So we've got fever more often than not. We've got the cow off enough that she'll stop eating and drinking, so we've got dehydration. And then if we let it run long enough, we'll get kind of shocking. That animal stops looking like a cow, just very depressed, very sullen, very inward. And we need to do something to make a difference there if we can. So how do you remember the sequence? I tend to remember 1 thing for 1, 2 things for 2, 3 things for 3. And we go from inward to outward. So milk's first, glands around that, body's around that. So moving through. So this is the standard recommendations associated, given out from the American Association of Bovine Practitioners. What are we trying to do for 1, 2, 3, and very bad 3? So we've already talked about the signs associated with that. So really ill, depressed, we can kill that animal very, very quickly if we don't intervene in some way. So the general treatment plan is no antibiotics for the mild cases, we assume that it's gonna self-correct. We can include it or not include it in our milking bulk tank. Probably don't want to have normal milk just from a quality standpoint. Has anybody ever done oxytocin and extra milk out between milking? More frequent milking? I don't know if anybody's ever done that, but that is an old recommendation. Nobody seems to do it. If we can get a situation where we've got the cows now involved, especially the quarter, maybe there's a benefit to intermammary injection to get that infection under control, or can we treat systemically with aspirin, anti-inflammatories, something to help that cow with her symptoms? And working our way down to should be what is it, hypertonic saline IV included in there, trying to get those fluids. So if we can get the cow to drink on her own, it's a whole lot easier than trying to do like a large scale IV to a cow. Takes forever. So you're looking at 15 gallons of blood. That means there's several gallons low. You got the big tub over there. I'm trying to get the animal to hold still long enough to allow an IV in for a length of time. I mean, I've done it, but these were special research circumstances and it's just not a lot of fun. So hypertonic saline, she gets a whole lot of salt in her blood. It makes her very thirsty. If she can drink 5 or 10 gallons of water, that's a whole lot easier than putting it through a little needle if I can do it. So that should flush through. We talked about that in A&P as to what that might do. So I think I'll end there today. A little light. Yeah. So it'd be nice to, well, unless we want to go out and talk in the sun, but the plan is to be in the udder.
We're going to their farm.
No. Yeah, how many toss?
No, I know, but at some point.
They would prefer we didn't, we'll talk about that. If we're trying to communicate as much information, you guys have the opportunity to discuss and ask questions. The project that we're doing, the information that I should have for you should allow you to get that done. So
I just didn't know. Actually, what I wanted to.